Hello and welcome back to the ACSC podcast. Thank you so much for the great feedback we've had so far. This is episode 5 for us, and I think this has absolutely flown by. But we're seeing great responses and great numbers coming in, so it means the world. Just a quick start before we get into our topic conversation. This week it's Mental Health Awareness Week, and personally for me, this is something that means a lot. I've had struggles with it, and I currently still do. But I just wanted to sort of mention this and get this out there because it's something that means a lot to myself and probably does mean a lot to my co-host Adil.
Yes, guys. Yeah, hi again. Yeah, thank you again for the amazing support and feedback we've had thus far on the 4 episodes. Just a quick one on that as well. Last episode obviously was away from football. So I hope you guys all enjoyed that, and hopefully we've brought in a different kind of audience, as hopefully we will do today because it's another different topic away from football as well. Again, yeah, like Charles just said there as well, it is Mental Health Week. So we'll just touch on that as well. Like he said as well, he's affected it himself. We mentioned, I think it was on our first ever episode or the second one where we touched a little bit how how football, for example, can
Yeah,
affect our mental health. Exactly. So yeah, a little bit from that as well that we've all gone through our struggles, but this is probably a week where we can potentially do our little bits out there to help get the awareness out there. Just want to say before, obviously Charles just mentioned a bit more on it. From both of us here at ACSC, we are obviously very supportive and will do what we can for any sort of anyone struggling with mental health that want to pop up to us and speak to us about anything. Not that we're absolute, we know everything about it or anything like that at all, but we're just another person to speak to if anyone needs to do that. So like I said, our DMs, me and Charles, are always open to to talk about any of that, and we'll always be here for you guys. So I just pass it back to Charles now.
brilliant. And that is the main thing. Not saying we're professionals or anything in this, but for me, my personal experience, talking to anyone is the main thing. Just airing your feelings makes such a difference. And just some of the things, seeing the stats about this week is there's an estimated in the UK alone, the 1 in 6 people suffer with some form of mental health problem, i.e., depression, anxiety, etc. It's such a renowned thing that people sort of don't really figure how big it actually is within the UK. And I just want to mention one of the main people I've had some help with is a UK charity called Mind. They're a UK charity based here, helping people within the UK for any issues you may have. It's completely confidential, and they have 2 helplines always there. There is a massive donation, so any donations to them would be a brilliant as a charity. That is the main thing. So if there is any issues anyone has, please, if we can help in any way here from us at ACSC, we are more than willing to help. So we'll now get into our topic of conversation this week, which is Formula One. Bit of a different conversation, but it's something I do enjoy watching just as much as quite a few people I know. And we'll get straight into it. We're just going to talk about a summarise of the drivers and teams for this season.
Yeah, exactly that. I think first we'll just touch on the season that obviously hasn't quite started this year, obviously due to the whole pandemic. The talks of the races, being delayed, and I'm not sure how many exactly we're going to have this year. But hopefully we will have a season, and hopefully there'll be enough to get a final standing. I'll just get Charles to touch back on the drivers for this year. We will touch on next year a little bit with the whole Sebastian Vettel news, which will come up later on. But I'll just go back to Charles on that, and if you can just run through the just a couple of main drivers for this year, and we'll go into that.
Yeah, of course. So I've just got some of them. Obviously, this season is Toro Rosso. They've got Gasly and Kvyat. Ferrari, Vettel and Leclerc. Obviously, this season, and obviously it's going to be an interesting battle between them two. Who's really going to be the number one driver after Leclerc having such an amazing first year? You've got Williams. It's a new lineup this season. You've got Latifi and Russell. Latifi was the F2 runner-up last season, replacing Kubica there this year. And Renault, you've got Ricardo and Ocon. Esteban Ocon coming back in this season, replacing Nico Hulkenberg, who's not going to be on the grid. And I think it's a bit of a shame because I do like him as a driver this year.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think we just didn't quite mention there as well. We've got at Red Bull, it's still Max Verstappen and Alex Albon. So they've unchanged as well this season. I think Max Verstappen, many tip him to be a future world champion, maybe future multiple world champion. Alex Albon's another interesting one. Maybe a little bit more of a low key driver, but a man who's proved himself to be a very good understudy to Verstappen, and he kind of can be a great teammate to him and potentially for a successful season for Red Bull.
like I say now, I think Albon is a very interesting driver. I like watching him last season. He come into that car and has pushed Verstappen, and he can push him for times, and that's the main thing which Christian Horner's always said. He wants a second driver that can compete with Verstappen. Everyone knows how quick Verstappen can be in that car, but they've always had that struggle of trying to get someone next to him to push him and compete. And I think Albon's done that so well so far.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. I think Alex Albon, since he's come in, if you, as you mentioned there as well, in the qualifying as well, I think he's out qualified Verstappen a couple of times. He's even finished, I think, twice or three times where he finished above Max
Yeah,
Verstappen in the races.
yeah.
So he's definitely, yeah, exactly. So he has proved his share, and he's obviously, like we say, he's a good pairing. They're both very young drivers, both of them, and if they both can, live up to their potential, then Red Bull have got a pairing there that can, lead them to potential world championships.
That's the main thing. I think Red Bull want to try and get back on top. Obviously, they had all this success with Vettel before, but they've never really competed since then. So they're a team trying to come back, and obviously it's a very similar situation to Ferrari. Obviously, this year with Sebastian Vettel, world champion, everything, who was meant to be the number one driver, and then out come Charles Leclerc last season, who drove phenomenal, and he's my one and probably my personal favourite driver on the grid at the moment for someone so young. But just watching what he does in that car this season, you could argue to say he's the number one driver at Ferrari.
Yeah, I personally think Charles Leclerc again. He's a driver that I have so much admiration for. He's a young driver, but if you watch his press conferences and his interviews, he's got his head screwed on. He's a very modest kind of man as he is. His persona is just very modest, and and when he drives, he's a very tactical. He's always thinking ahead. He's not a rash driver. He's a very very like it doesn't make very. If you see the race, he's hardly ever making mistakes. He's hardly ever got any DNFs. Of course, he's young and he's still learning the trade. But for me, between him and obviously Verstappen, as people see as the next generation, if you like, Verstappen and Leclerc, I see that Leclerc as a more maybe Verstappen's got more of the natural talent. But if you're looking at, because obviously you can't just go with talent, you got
Yeah,
to go with, smart driving and, not get DNS, etc. I think Leclerc can definitely push him for world championships. And obviously we'll just push that into and link it into who can potentially challenge Lewis Hamilton, who's obviously six-time world champion, the current driver's world champion at the moment. So
yeah, yeah,
it
of
will be
course.
interesting to see who could potentially challenge him this year. From my understanding, if you look at the car Mercedes have got, again, we expect them to be the front runners. And then obviously Lewis Hamilton, who's obviously won the last two world championships, hot on form at the moment. And for me, this particular year, it will be interesting because Leclerc has stepped up. You've got Verstappen. Vettel is kind of on the decline. So I think for me, Lewis Hamilton,
I think he has been for a few seasons though.
yeah,
It's not
yeah,
just a recent thing for Bell. I think you're looking at the last few, even last season, the amount of errors he's been making over the last few seasons. It's like looking at a completely different driver compared to the one that when he won, was it two titles in a row, three titles? He looked phenomenal. Now you look at the amount of mistakes he's making. It's like it's an amateur driving at times.
In fact, I do believe he won four in a row. He won four world championships for Red Bull. Yeah,
Was it
exactly.
four?
So I mean,
Yeah. And
yeah,
that's it's and like, obviously you think that, and then he went to Ferrari, and everyone thought this is it. He's going to kick on, but since he's gone there, it's I don't know if the fame got to his head or being at Ferrari, which is obviously seen as the best team. Well, I won't say the best, but the most famous, reputable team. If Ferrari, in a way, is like the Real Madrid of football, they're the elite of the elite.
yeah, exactly that. I think you're spot on. I think Ferraris, any Formula One drivers coming through, anyone a young, astute driver that wants to succeed in F1 always wants to race for Ferrari. And like you say, they are the Real Madrid, where they're maybe not the best team right now, but in terms of history and reputable, as you were saying, they are the most reputable F1 team. Sebastian Vettel again, a driver who have over the years, with his rivalry with Lewis Hamilton, has been very public. He's a man that over the years I've had so much respect for, and I've only grown more respect for Sebastian Vettel. He did win four world championships in a row. It was with an absolutely unbelievable Red Bull car, but that doesn't discredit what Sebastian Vettel did, because at the end of the day, he had a teammate who had the same car as him. Yes, he might be driver one and driver two, but Sebastian
Yeah,
Vettel,
yeah.
to win four championships in a row, I know he's one of the greatest F1 drivers in history with four world championships. You can't take that away from him. it is a shame to see exactly, and it's a shame to
No.
see his decline. I mean, last year was for me being a fan of Sebastian Vettel. It was quite hard to watch. I mean, Charles Leclerc, as much as I'm a big fan of him, he outperformed him. And if I just look at Charles Leclerc last year, if you look at the first 7 races of the year, Sebastian Vettel out qualified him and finished higher than him out of 6 out of the first 7 races. So everyone thought, yep, Sebastian Vettel, he's the number one driver, and he's going to be, Charles Leclerc, it's his debut kind of season. He's going to be the understudy. But if you look at the last 13 races, 10 of them, Charles Leclerc out-qualified him. Now, and obviously I think he finished higher than
Yeah,
him was it in 9 of them, or he might have even finished, well, I think it was
I think it's about
7, yeah,
yeah, and obviously the main thing was everyone thinks of Clerk was obviously winning in Italy with the whole massive scenes of the celebrations. That sticks out for me as Leclerc's major highlight, winning that race there, which they haven't done for years. But and like you're saying, is Leclerc coming to the scene as like I said, he's become the number one there, and I think I don't know with Vettel, is it a bit of an arrogance thing as well? Obviously, he's seen this young kid coming up who's taken his limelight away from him. You've seen it on the radio, they have some of the arguments back and forth. It's very childish like as well, but it's interesting to see that dynamic between them.
exactly that. I think Sebastian Vettel, there could be a sense of complacency. I mean, you had Charles Leclerc coming through. Maybe he was very sure, Vettel, I mean, very sure he's the number one driver. And then obviously soon become apparent where he probably wasn't. And it just got to Sebastian Vettel. He started making very big errors. Errors that, especially for a German driver, very efficient driver over the years, very few mistakes, Sebastian Vettel. And then, in the last season itself, we saw, I think, 2 or 3 DNFs, very bad mistakes where he's
Yeah.
crashed into the back of Max Verstappen.
It was this season, wasn't
Yeah,
it, when he crashed into him,
exactly.
wasn't it?
No,
Or was it
I
last
believe it
season?
was just a season gone. He's had a couple,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
what I
he's had a
thought,
couple of
yeah.
run-ins with his teammate Charles Leclerc, and he's just made errors where you just wouldn't expect it for such an experienced driver. And I
No,
think the
no.
inevitability of Sebastian Vettel potentially leaving Ferrari, which we'll touch on at the end, I think we'll just finish off on Lewis Hamilton at the moment. But it's just been, for me, it hasn't come as a surprise. I mean, many people saw it and gone, oh, that's a big surprise. And what it's done is it's opened up, opportunity for other drivers to move to so many different teams, which we'll get onto as well. But for me, it's not been a surprise. I think Sebastian Vettel's decline has been evident for a couple of seasons, as you've been saying. And Ferrari have been planning for his aftermath for a while. And I think Charles Leclerc, being the number one driver,
Hmm.
has been, on their forefront and on their mind for a while. So again, not a surprise for me, and definitely not a competitor to Lewis Hamilton for the current coming up season this year.
No, I think this season, I think is a given until the rules change, which we'll touch on slightly. But obviously, the rules have now been pushed back until 2022. That's where it's going to be make it a bit more of a level playing field for a lot of the teams. The same budget costs, different types of cars. That will make it probably a bit more exciting to watch for people, as it won't just be what you'd say the top three, which is Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, and then you got best of the rest, which we can touch on in a little while, which I like. It's a bit more interesting watching some of them guys race, but I think Hamilton will win again this year. It's a given. I can't see anyone pushing him. It'll be interesting to see how Max can do, because I
Mm,
think Max has got to push up now.
yeah.
He's been this driver for the last 3 years who everyone's saying he's the wonder kid, but he's now got to try and make a mark and get this world championship, because it will only be so long. There's so many races ever before him. Daniel Ricciardo was very similar, going to be this wonder kid, and now look at him.
Exactly that. I mean, if you look at the like Daniel Ricciardo, as you're saying, he had, when he was at Red Bull, there was potential, and we saw maybe could he. There was even questions, could he be a world champion? Something Mark Webber couldn't do, his fellow countryman.
Yeah,
But he's almost become Mark Webber number two, basically. He's had a tough time. Red Bull left Red Bull, didn't quite work out for them, and obviously coming to Renault now, where it's very interesting. I quite like the lineup they've got this year with Danny Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon. Ocon, who
Ocon.
was, I believe he still
Yeah.
might be the reserve driver for Mercedes. However, he's in a 2-year contract with Renault at the moment, effective from this season. So that's a bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think the link with Ocon is his agent is Toto Wolff, who is obviously the general manager
Oh, there you go.
at Mercedes. So
Mm,
I think the long term
yeah,
plan is he will step into the Mercedes car eventually, but they can't not get him experience on the track. And being at Renault, I think it's an exciting team to be part of.
yeah. Yeah, exactly that. And I think In terms of results, maybe not. Again, like you said, they had Nico Hulkenberg, who's a very reputable driver who's missed out this year. I do like their lineup. I don't fancy their chances to, compete at all. For me, as we just go back on the Lewis Hamilton thing as well, you were mentioning how it's probably a given. The way I see it is Lewis Hamilton, out of all the drivers on the grid this year, if again we have to stress as well, if we get races to go ahead, I know we've got the Silverstone thing where they've said back-to-back racing. Where Charles, I'll let you touch on that in a
Yeah,
second.
yeah.
But like I said, if the calendar year and we do have races, I just feel Lewis Hamilton will win more than the rest. He's going to make less mistakes than the rest, and he might not win every race, but he will accumulate more points than anyone in terms of, he's a smart driver now. He's the most experienced driver out of everyone on the grid now. He'll know a second place he'll settle for. It'll take him 18 points
He
still.
doesn't take
I
them
think for now,
risks
I think
as
Lewis,
much.
no, exactly. Before, the rash Lewis Hamilton, the exciting almost Lewis Hamilton over the years where we see he's like, no, I want to win. And
Yeah.
what would happen is he'd go for the win and he'd crash out or, get a penalty and he'd drop back into a grid. Now Lewis Hamilton is like, you know what? I can do with a couple of second places. I can do with a couple of 18 points. And then I can get back onto my perch and win the next race. And he'll keep him on top of the standings. He's a smarter driver now, Lewis
I
Hamilton.
think this
And
is
for me,
where
yeah, go on.
Verstappen needs to learn and take that approach. Verstappen is such an
Yeah,
exciting driver, but he's so still immature in the head that it is exciting to watch when he's sometimes you've seen him at the back of the podium when he comes third. Brilliant when you can do that, but there are certain races he needs to, like you're saying, be smarter and take them extra points where it comes in at a few seconds because they're what matter when it comes towards the end of the season.
exactly that. I think Max Verstappen again for me, watching the races of Red Bull last year, he is, and I say this with a pinch of salt, but if we remember Ayrton Senna, the way he used to go through the field, I've not seen. I know Lewis Hamilton, he's had his few races where he's been unbelievable. Since Ayrton Senna, I've not seen anyone as good as Max Verstappen to go through the grid the way he does. It's absolutely phenomenal, and in terms of God-given talent as a racer, he's got it. He has absolutely got it. If you can turn, like you said, turn that into maturity and absolutely like screw his head on a little bit and become a bit more cautious like maybe Charles Leclerc is, Max Verstappen will win multiple world championships and I've absolutely no doubt about that.
I think that is I think the battle like we've touched on is obviously going to be, I think Verstappen, Leclerc, Ocon. He's a potential in there. We haven't touched on George Russell at Williams. I think he's a very good driver as well, and I think he's got a lot of potential. When he's been in that car, he's impressed me a little bit this year. Uh, Obviously, Carlos Sainz is in that section as well. There's a lot of drivers coming through that have got potential. Obviously, Albon at Red Bull, who we touched on earlier. I think it's a very exciting time for F1. There's a lot of young drivers coming through who are showing a lot of potential.
Yeah, exactly that. I feel like you were just saying there, the drivers you just mentioned, they're all very young. They've all got their future ahead of them. Again, George Russell, you mentioned there. Yeah, he is the reserve driver for Mercedes. And there was talk of from next year where Valtteri Bottas would potentially leave his role as the understudy to Hamilton, and they'll have a British pairing with Russell and Hamilton, which will be interesting. It'll be a nice little watch for us as well. That'd be to have two British drivers in one team, especially in the most successful team, which is Mercedes at the moment,
Yeah,
would be nice to watch. But we'll obviously touch on that later on as well, where we'll talk about the driver changes for next year because it does open up a possibility for many drivers.
yeah. So we'll sort of start touching on Sebastian Vettel a little bit more in his situation. So obviously, the news has now
Yes,
broke.
yes.
As of next season, Sebastian Vettel will no longer be at Ferrari, and Carlos Sainz is replacing him, which I think is a very interesting move for Ferrari. In my eyes, I think they're taking a different approach. They're not going for a ready-made superstar anymore. They're going up for building an interesting team with Leclerc and Sainz. It's sort of taking a new approach that we can bring these youngsters in and we can turn them into world champions.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of faith shown in their products, in the young drivers, and it's nice to see. I think it's the way that many teams are going now. Red Bull are doing it. Mercedes, well, we've got Hamilton, but they're thinking about Russell. Ferrari are doing it, and I really appreciate that. I think it's really good that they are doing that. Obviously, if you look over the years, they had Kimi Räikkönen for a year or two, brought him back. It was like, but again, an experienced driver. They brought in Sebastian Vettel, who's again was more experienced as well. So now to see a pairing of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz, who I think is an absolutely brilliant driver. Where was he? Was he at Toro Rosso last season?
I believe, Carlos Sainz. I want to say it was at Renault.
Or was it
I want
Red
to say it
Bull?
was
I'm not
Renault. with Ricardo. I
Okay,
want to
okay.
say
Oh, it
because
might have been, yeah,
I don't know if you've seen.
yeah.
There's
But
a
then
good
again, yeah,
documentary to watch if any F1 fans are out there on Netflix. It's called Drive to Survive. There's 2 seasons now, and it's all behind the scenes, and it is such a good watch to see the characters they build. As obviously, you see Ricardo, everyone knows he's the funny man within F1 playing the pranks and so on.
yes, of course he
But
is.
it's,
Yeah,
it's an interesting thing like that, and just touching on the teams for next season, McLaren's interesting one. Obviously, who's going to replace Sainz? And they've got Landon Norris, I believe, from what I've seen, a lot of reports, and it's going to be Ricardo and Norris because Ricardo's now leaving Renault after this season, going over to McLaren, as I think he said it's a better switch for his car, and McLaren are changing from a Renault engine to a Mercedes, which will be a very interesting to see if that can bring them any better success.
yeah. McLaren, a team who over the years have had their fair share of success. The last 3, 4 years have probably been the worst in their F1 history. It's just been one driver after another, and it's just they've had Kevin Magnussen or Lando Norris who retains his spot for next year, and it's Danny Ricciardo who didn't quite work out for him at Red Bull. I mean, sorry, not Red Bull, at Renault. But now he's at McLaren again, like you said, with the Mercedes engines. I really hope they can challenge, well, not challenge, but at least be a bit more competitive. And I hope especially for Danny Ricciardo's sake, that it works for him. McLaren's a big move for him, and that will be really interesting to see.
I think it's a
It's,
huge move.
yeah,
They're an interesting team. I think it's big things coming up there, and obviously Racing Point will be changing names as of next season to Aston
yeah,
Martin. Obviously, their lineup will be Perez and Lance Stroll. There to there, and it's I think how much money is there going to be pumped into a team to try and make them successful?
yeah, exactly that. And it's an interesting one again. Just to change of name to, like you said, to Aston Martin. As you just say, with Lance Stroll and who was it? Perez, Sergio
Perez
Perez,
is on
yes.
there.
So again, another couple of young
Yeah, yeah,
drivers. Sergio Perez had he was linked with the Ferrari role a couple of years back, when Vettel was there. Um, one
yeah,
reason
yeah.
or another didn't quite work out for him. But that is another interesting lineup. And obviously, I think we've got for Toro Rosso next year. I think they're unchanged. I think it's still Pierre Gasly and Danny Kvyat, I believe, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing for Toro Rosso is it's no longer called
No,
Toro
it's not.
Rosso. They're now called
Yes,
AlphaTauri.
yes.
AlphaTauri, they've changed their name. I think that's a new partnership there, and I think it's an interesting factor is to see how successful teams like that can be within F1.
Mm,
It's
mm.
having basically like a feeder team within F1, and it's a good
Yeah,
dynamic,
it
I
is,
think.
and I think, like I said, they're always Toro Rosso. They're always the understudy to the A team, if you like, for Red Bull. You had I think Max Verstappen came through Toro Rosso, then promoted to Red Bull. So
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of
yeah, he
them
did.
do that. Alex Albon again, another one who was promoted, and I think Danny Kvyat or Pierre Gasly, one or the other, who was in Red Bull, got demoted to Toro Rosso. I think it
Pierre,
might be Gasly. Was it
no,
Kvyat?
Kvyat went up from Toro Rosso,
Red
went
Bull.
up to no, no, so like it was
Gasly. Yeah,
Gasly.
yeah,
Gasly went from Toro Rosso up
yeah.
to
That's
Red Bull, and then got dropped midway through for Albon to
exactly
replace
that.
him
So they
in the
having
car.
that four drivers effectively for that team helps them to kind of work out what's right and who's the better driver and whatnot. Again on the Vettel situation as well. Vettel, who at the moment is not going to be with a team for next season. Renault have obviously got Esteban Ocon, and there is a spot available. The Renault the team director has come out and said they are looking forward to going towards a younger approach and go through their reserve driver system, maybe go through that route. McLaren seats are obviously filled with Lando
Mm.
Norris and Danny Ricciardo. And then the interesting one, which I found very interesting, which I was just looking up in the last few days, is if Sebastian Vettel doesn't get this move, what I just mentioned now, is potentially retirement for him. The move that's been linked is partnering Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes next year. Again, we're not discredit what Valtteri Bottas has done as the number 2 at Mercedes, but Toto Wolff came out and said a German driver in a German team is very marketable. Now that might be a comment that might upset Lewis Hamilton. But what's interesting for me is,
That's
yeah,
the
what's
main
interesting
thing.
for me is they are two very alpha male drivers. None of them have got exactly years on them now in terms of they're not exactly like high potential past them anymore. Between them, there's 10 world championships. Absolutely unbelievable stuff that is. If you look at it as well, I was speaking to my brother yesterday actually at home as well regarding that kind of move. Vettel, Vettel, if
Yeah,
he
yeah.
wants to move to Mercedes, he has to accept to be a number 2 driver. Lewis Hamilton will not accept that if Mercedes promote Sebastian Vettel, it causes definite unrest with Lewis Hamilton, and upsetting a successful driver who's brought you success as a team would be catastrophic. Now, what's interesting is Sebastian Vettel, as much as he might come out and say, "Yeah, I'm happy to be an understudy," there is absolutely no chance he will. Soon as
No
he
way.
realizes,
No.
yeah, go on, I'll let you touch on that.
All you can say is, you look at it this year already. He's effectively sort of seen that dynamic with Leclerc. The amount of times they're arguing, they had the whole, I can't remember what race it was, when Leclerc let him pass because there was an agreement that he was quicker, etc. Then he did let Leclerc back in front. That just it shows the spitefulness is there.
That's yeah,
Not spiteful, it's the winner's mentality. There is no way him and Hamilton could ever work. Like you said, they're two alpha males.
yeah,
They're top
yeah,
dogs. And Hamilton has every right to demand to Mercedes saying,
yeah.
hold on,
That can't happen.
I've been your
Yeah,
top driver for this. Because I'm not being funny, there's always these rumours that Hamilton wants to go to Ferrari. He'll jump ship and any team would take him.
yeah. Of course he would. That's that. I mean, that's a given, isn't it? Really. I mean, it's been no secret that Lewis Hamilton has had admiration for Ferrari and always wanted to race for them. Now I don't see it ever happening because they've got two young drivers who
No, I
no,
can't. Not with
no,
science
science
going
there.
there.
And obviously Charles Leclerc won't. I mean, he's an alpha male in himself now. In the Red Bull as well, they've got Max Verstappen and Alex Albon, who's not confirmed yet for next year. But Christian Horner came out and said Sebastian Vettel moving to them is extremely unlikely. He hasn't ruled it out, but I just don't see that happening. Again, the Mercedes move, it'd be an interesting one, but soon as Vettel realizes he's going to be in the fastest car with Lewis Hamilton, he's going to train and work hard to be as competitive as ever. And as you said, the spiteful, as you were saying, the winner's mentality, which I love about Sebastian Vettel,
Oh
is that he
yeah, of
just
course he
doesn't
is.
want to like give in. He's like, no, I'm still the A-lister. And going to Mercedes is for me, it's a car crash waiting to happen. And if that happened, then Sebastian Vettel will not lie down and take a number two driver. But then again, will he? If he wants to stay in Formula One, he might have to accept that because otherwise, Sebastian Vettel won't have a place for next season, and the four-time world champion might potentially have to hang up his well, hang up his boots if you like.
Well, I don't know. It might be the fact he has a few seasons out. I think he's always going to be a driver that's wanted. And I've seen a few links with Renault. They're looking at him or Fernando
Yes,
Alonso,
yes.
who's obviously been gone. But I can't see Alonso wanting to come back unless it's in a car at compete. Obviously, he had the whole disaster of his last run where the car just couldn't compete, and the amount of times on the radio is basically just slagging the car off
Mm.
constantly. And I can't see him wanting to come back into another car where it's not going to be able to compete.
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, I think to be honest, again, the Vettel thing. I mean, if you look at his age now, he's 32. For me personally, being a four-time world champion, he's done what he's done. You are absolutely right in saying, of course, you can drive until 35, 36. Why not? But if he was to leave F1 now, for me, especially if you look at the young drivers that are taking up the team spots now, that would be that for Sebastian Vettel personally. You wouldn't want to see such a great. If you look at the grid now, I think Lewis Hamilton is a world champion. Top of my head, apart from Sebastian Vettel, I can't think of another driver who's on the grid right now. Kimi Raikkonen obviously is a world champion, who's at Alfa Romeo. But apart from that, I don't think. Is there any
Yeah,
more
yeah.
world champions on the grid? I don't think there is. I don't believe so. No,
I don't
exactly.
think
So
so.
you're losing out. The sport
No,
could
no.
potentially lose out a four-time world champion. It would be a big loss. But for me, the inevitable, which is it's going to happen. I mean, Vettel, what would happen this year, which is very, very interesting to see for the coming up season, is Sebastian Vettel going to push, and to just put any suitors out there saying, look, I'm still available. I'm still a big driver. I can still get results and, maybe get people out there looking for him as a 2021 driver? Or is there going to be a sad kind of exit for him where Leclerc is the A-list driver and he's just a second driver for the season? I'd love to see Sebastian Vettel, his winning nature come out, and I'd love to see him be competitive. It would be interesting to see, and hopefully, I think if you just mention on the Silverstone thing as well, to see if we will have any potential race this.
Yeah, no, of course. So obviously, the few links to Silverstone will be back to back, and I think the Austrian Grand Prix is also meant to be two back to back, and I think it'll be the first time that's ever happened in the history of F1 having back to back race like that. And I can understand why they want to do it because they need to get races in, but does it sort of take away that dynamic of the race in a way?
Mm,
It doesn't make it such as special as a
no, it doesn't.
weekend
No.
of the. And I know I think, and that's what I can. But then there's there's so many aspects coming into it. It's not like sort of we're seeing the German football coming back. It's not just a certain
No,
few people. The amount of people per
yeah,
each team that have got to be involved. How do you make something like that work?
yeah, exactly. You can't have, let's send 20 people down. It doesn't work like that. You've got there's such a mechanical teams. You've got the engineering side of people. You've got the people on the database. You've obviously got the people just to tie up the pit change. You got to have at least four drivers there. I mean, four mechanics. They're just there. Then you've got the two drivers, you've got the team principal, you've got the media, who are obviously probably not as important. But again, it's a difficult one. But then
Yeah,
again, financially, the way this pandemic has hit us all and hit all of sports, they need to restart. Otherwise, you've got teams that are in big trouble, and we do need to see a restart. And I think again, the Prime Minister came out and said last weekend that obviously from June the 1st in the UK, all sporting activity can commence. So Formula One effectively can start again as well. So hopefully, potentially from July and maybe mid June, we might start to see a bit more of the major sports to come back, and hopefully Formula One can be one of those. Again, I'd love to see it happen. You're right; it does take away that exciting feeling, because the Formula One, you have each city, each country have their own weekend and make it special themselves. So it does take that away. But as racing fans as we all are, it's very important that we can see racing again this year, because the season hasn't actually started. They could potentially miss out on this year. But then again, the financial implications that has could be catastrophic for certain teams. It's not like football where they've already played 75% of the season. They haven't actually started the Formula One season yet. So there is
no, no,
that,
no.
but
Yeah,
ultimately it has to be what's right. It has to be what's safe ultimately, um, and that's the main thing on that really.
yeah. It's such a like saying there. It's the main thing. I think, but that can also go both ways due to the fact that the season hasn't actually started.
Mm.
You can easily call this and say, look,
Yeah,
scrap this season off. Will come back next year when it's safe. They've got times to bring
correct.
implements in, make everything completely. In a way, this could change the way the sport works. They've got chance to revamp everything. I think even touch it slightly a bit on the Bundesliga was the way that it worked. Is these are ways that you can bring changes in to happen to make the game better going forward.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's very interesting because, like I said, the season hasn't started, so they've got a bit more flexibility than the football. It will be interesting to see. I think the decisions are still being made. We will keep our eyes peeled on it, and I believe, Charles, I'll just let you touch on potentially the rule changes that we'll talk about later on. But I believe for this episode, I think that's what we'll wrap up on that, and I'll just let Charles wrap up and finish up
Yeah, so
on
like the
that note.
rules, they're being changed. I think there's it's a big, massive, extensive list of rules that's being changed, and that was meant to come in from next season. But obviously, with this whole COVID-19 situation, that's now been pushed back into 2022. So we've got an idea of a video coming in the next, I wouldn't say few weeks, but later on in the year, we'll have a video dedicated about that.
Yeah,
We can
yeah,
talk a bit more potentially about how the season's going on, if it does get started, etc. And we can sort of go through some of them rules because there is a huge amount of list of rules that are changing. I think it's going to change the way the whole sport goes forward and make it more exciting. But like Adil said there for this week,
yeah.
thank you so much for everyone
Hmm.
listening. I think we'll probably go back to football as a topic next week. It's been 2 weeks away from it. We've got some
Yes, we will.
ideas. There's been
Yes.
a lot going on. Obviously, Bundesliga is back. Football's back at last, even though I've seen quite a few people very opinionated about it. But I'm glad football's back. That's the
Yeah.
main thing. But for this week, thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you guys again next week.